And it goes up again into a majority position, about 53%. So Wales and England, both quite a bit more doubtful about the EU than they were 40 years ago.
Wales is at home in Europe, and Europe is at home in Wales. 500 companies from other EU countries have their base in Wales. I don't want those companies to feel they're no longer welcome.
تشير الإحصاءات الرسمية إلى أن مليارات الجنيهات من ميزانية الاتحاد الأوروبي أنفقت في ويلز بنحو 680 مليون جنيه استرليني سنوياً. يتألف الجزء الأكبر منها من المساعدات الإقليمية الموزعة على أكثر المناطق فقراً في الاتحاد الأوروبي والمتعلقة تحديداً بالسياسة الزراعية المشتركة والصناديق الهيكلية، إذ تعتبر أجزاء من جنوب ويلز حيث نقف الآن من بين أفقر الأجزاء في الاتحاد الأوروبي بأكمله. ووفقاً للحكومة الويلزية فإن المشاريع الممولة من الاتحاد الأوروبي ساعدت منذ عام 2007 في دعم نحو 73 ألف شخص في سوق العمل وإنشاء نحو 12 ألف شركة ونحو 37 ألف فرصة عمل، ما يعني أن التمويل المستلم في ويلز كان يفوق المبلغ الذي يسهم به دافعو الضرائب الويلزيون في مدفوعات المملكة المتحدة في ميزانية الاتحاد الأوروبي. فهل فعلاً عضت ويلز اليد التي مدت إليها أم أنها قضمتها بالكامل؟
Hello there, do come in. Yeah, good to see you. Right, okay.
What has to be borne in mind whenever there is a debate about the EU and Wales is the fact that Wales is the poorest of the four nations within the United Kingdom and therefore has relied for quite a few years on contributions that have come from the European Commission in order to rejuvenate the Welsh economy. The difficulty that Wales has had is that until the 1980s there were a lot of coal mines in South Wales, and a lot of people were living in communities where the great majority of workers were actually employed by the coal mines. So what happened in the 1980s was that a lot of coal mines got closed down, which meant that these communities really had no raison d'etre anymore. In the 1990s, the people who were in charge of the Welsh office, which is the UK government department that was in charge of Wales effectively before devolution came about in 1999, devised a plan in order to make sure that Wales got the maximum amount of regional aid from the European Union.
Wales was a net beneficiary from the European Union, so unlike the rest of the UK, it played out differently on economic grounds because of the certain industries that exist in the different parts of the UK and those trade links, the importance of certain trade links which are more profound in some areas than others, and also culturally and politically.
Wales as a whole has benefited enormously from investments from the European Union. In terms of investments in universities alone, we've received around 300 million since 2014 over the most recent period of funding.
نحن الآن في صدد الدخول إلى أحد المشاريع العلمية، وهو مشروع كالين الممول من الصندوق الأوروبي للتنمية الإقليمية من خلال حكومة ويلز. هذا المشروع الضخم والذي بدأ عام 2016 يمثل شبكة تربط الشركات التجارية والصناعية ورائدي الأعمال بخبراء في العلوم الطبية والصيدلانية المتقدمة وتكنولوجيا النانو والتكنولوجيا الحيوية من 6 جامعات رائدة في كل من إيرلندا وويلز، إحداها جامعة سوانزي، حيث نقف مهدد اليوم بوقف التمويل.
So Calin was initiated in 2016, so we've been running for nearly 7 years now, and the project will finish or at the end of August. The project was funded through the Ireland Wales Interreg programme, so this is structural funds that come from Europe. And unfortunately, as a result of the Brexit situation, we're not going to be able to continue projects like this because that funding is going to come to an end.
A lot of attention has been given to the EU money that has come into Wales, and it was very important. And I know that many people found it very strange when at the time of the referendum in 2016, there was a majority of people in Wales who actually voted against it. There were various reasons for that.
52% for Leave and 48% for Remain. So that's very good for Leave. They're winning in a place where Remain were expected to win.
It's really notable when you look at that referendum result that you see that differentiation across the different territories of the UK. So Scotland voting much more convincingly to remain within the European Union, Northern Ireland voting to remain, and obviously England and Wales voting Leave.
Personally, I think there may have been quite a lot of miscommunication at the time of the Brexit vote.
17 out of 22 local authority areas in Wales returned a Leave vote.
For many people in Wales, particularly in these poorer areas which were actually getting help, there was a sense of hopelessness, and they had a general grievance with authorities because they thought that they had been let down. And this really wasn't the fault of the European Union. It was the result of broader issues relating to the fact that, for example, the UK is a very centralised economy based largely on London and the southeast of England. And when the opportunity came along for them to express their sense of grievance in a vote, they decided to vote against it because they were against authority, even though it's possible to argue that they were voting against their own best interests. And that's the tragedy of it, really.
There were certain elements of why we should leave that were very strongly promoted, but the wider impact of what would happen should we leave wasn't evident.
One of the campaigning techniques during the referendum by the Leave campaign was to have a bus which toured the UK with big messages displayed on the outside of the bus, talking about how when Britain left the EU, it would be possible to spend an extra £350 million a week on the National Health Service. And this was a very powerful message that went to the population. I remember actually personally being quite shocked on one occasion when I went to a rally that was being organised by the Remain campaign, those people who wanted to stay within the EU, and the man who was leading the Labour Party's campaign, Alan Johnson, who's a former Home Secretary, came to Barry, which is a town about 10 miles away from Cardiff, and he was doing a walkabout.
Leaving the EU would be a catastrophe.
And I was shocked that local people were there and were shouting quite insulting things at him, calling him traitor.
And this will be the battleground for the debate over whether Britain should be in or out of the European Union.
And when I spoke to these people, I was writing a piece for a paper about this visit, I was saying, why are you shouting traitor at him? And they were saying, he is the one, or he's involved in this supporting the EU, and he doesn't want extra money to go to the health service. So they had swallowed this line that was being peddled to them by the Leave campaigners, and it had got to the point where it was so toxic that they were actually talking about people being traitors, and I mean far-right publications were actually publishing horrible things.
يرجح البعض أن العوامل التي أدت إلى التصويت لصالح الخروج كثيرة، على رأسها مركزية الإعلام في لندن، حيث أدت الصحف وشاشات التلفزة الإنجليزية دورا كبيرا في وصول الأمور إلى ما آلت إليه.
Right-wing newspapers who peddled the line that the EU was some kind of malevolent force. I mean, it really was as bad as that. And this went on for decades, so you would have people reading this material. And what we mustn't forget, for example, is that Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, at one time wrote for the Daily Telegraph as a journalist, and he was based in Brussels. And the fact of the matter is that he used to make up stories about the EU. And for example, he would say that there is a regulation being brought in against bent bananas. I mean, I know a former Euro MP who tackled him about this at the time. This is decades ago. And Boris Johnson just sort of shrugged it off as a joke. And this story had actually got on the front page of the Daily Telegraph.
تقتصر الأموال الأوروبية المتدفقة إلى ويلز على برامج المساعدات الإقليمية فحسب، بل امتدت لتشمل قروضاً بقيمة ملياري جنيه استرليني أقرضها بنك الاستثمار الأوروبي لويلز، بما في ذلك قرض بقيمة 60 مليون يورو لحرم جامعة سوانزي الجديد. هذه الجامعة التي استفادت أيضاً ككل الجامعات الويلزية من مبادرات أوروبية أخرى، كبرنامج هورايزن 2020، وهو برنامج التمويل والأبحاث والابتكار التابع للاتحاد الأوروبي بين عامي 2014 و2020. تشير الأرقام إلى أن ويلز تلقت وحدها 140 مليون يورو من صندوق هورايزن.
So we're now not in a position of receiving this European social funding that we've had at the scale that we've had previously. And so for us, we are having to make a transition. And we are, as a consequence of that, at risk of losing many jobs. Across Wales as a whole, there will be around 1,000 jobs that will be lost, and those will be from the universities. And each of those are really talented individuals.
The Brexit situation has impacted certainly the universities at quite a wide number of levels. European funding was a major source of funding for many of the projects that we do, and the scale of the funding was substantial, so it wasn't unusual for us to have multi-million-pound projects. And those projects have not only supported research and development, but they've allowed us to build state-of-the-art facilities. And so the knock-on effect is that it makes it more difficult for us to deliver that kind of training if we're not able to maintain the facilities that we have.
So I have a research leadership role at the university, and so I'm really concerned that we continue to attract research students into the university. And clearly we've been able to support research students with a funding mechanism that looked very similar to the students that came from the UK. And so we're now having to look at that differently, and there has been a potential risk that we may not attract so many really talented students from Europe as we have done previously.
كثيرة هي التأثيرات المباشرة التي لحقت بويلز بعد بريكزيت، لكن ثمة ما هو غير مباشر، كتوقف أكبر المشروعات على سواحلها. إذ تعد قوة المد والجزر في سوانزي جنوب ويلز من أقوى قوى المد والجزر في العالم. تايدل لاجون هو اسم المشروع الذي لطالما تحدث عنه سياسيو ويلز وأبناؤها. مشروع استباقي في مجالات الطاقة المتجددة، يعمل على استغلال القوة الطبيعية لإنتاج الكهرباء، وذلك من خلال إنشاء بحيرات وتدوير توربينات ضخمة تفوق تكلفته 1,300,000,000 جنيه استرليني، ويوفر بعد إتمامه 8% من احتياجات المملكة المتحدة للطاقة الكهربائية، عدا عن تأمينه كثيراً من فرص العمل لأبناء المنطقة.
He's right that tidal lagoons do have potential. Last month we launched an independent review of tidal lagoon power.
ظهرت خطته الأولى عام 2013.
It's time to stop talking and start delivering for Wales.
وحصل على إذن التخطيط من الحكومة المركزية في لندن عام 2015. وعلى الرغم من عرض حكومة ويلز استثمار 200 مليون جنيه استرليني في المشروع، إلا أن حكومة المملكة المتحدة في ويستمنستر عادت وألغت الخطة بالكامل عام 2018 بحجة التكلفة العالية للمشروع.
Where is the tidal lagoon? The people of Wales deserve an answer. They deserve those jobs and they deserve consideration of the UK government.
يسود اعتقاد راسخ بين أهالي المنطقة أن السبب الرئيس في ذلك هو بريكزيت.
One would have to say that this was all coming at a time when Brexit was on the horizon and money therefore was tight, and so it was quite convenient for the UK government to be able to say we're not going to proceed with this project. One would hope that in the future it's something that could be taken forward, perhaps in a different form. I mean, it could be seen as the template for other renewable energy projects, and there's an awful lot of tidal power available around the coastline of Wales. And I think that people are coming around to the conclusion that for the future we need to develop a green economy.
تم الرحيل إذن، خسرت ويلز وتأثرت، وعلى الرغم من أنه سيبقى بإمكانها الوصول إلى بعض التمويل الأوروبي وفق اتفاقيات عدة وقعت، إلا أن الواقع الجديد يفرض تحديات مختلفة على البلد الصغير.
For Wales, what was important was to redevelop its international strategy in the context of the UK being outside the European Union. And if you look at the Welsh Government's 2019 international strategy, right at the top, you see that Wales has profiled itself as a European nation. And that relationship with Europe, not just the European Union, but the European Union really is a kind of a crossroads within Europe, but that relationship with Europe is really important. So the Welsh Government has said it's going to continue having that presence within Brussels. It's opened up additional offices in other European countries. Now they have a new international office in Paris and a new office in Berlin, so increasing its presence within that European space. Wales also participates within a range of different European networks. Now, networks are a really big part of European decision-making.
إذن سبل كثيرة تستغلها ويلز لتعزيز مكانتها الإقليمية. لكن ماذا عن الداخل؟ وأي سيادة وقرار لويلز في ظل اتحاد المملكة؟
When we think about sovereignty and powers within the UK, we need to remember that devolution, so that shift of powers from London to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, all happened within the context of the UK's membership of the European Union. And that actually made certain things a lot more straightforward than they otherwise would have been. So let's take an example. If we look at an area that is devolved, such as agriculture, and was also Europeanized, it meant that the decisions that were being made, separate decisions that were being made in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and in Westminster for England, were all contained within this European framework. So when this European framework is lifted, that leaves huge scope for divergence. So there was a focus then on maintaining the UK's own internal market.
In the devolution settlement for Wales, economic development is supposed to be the responsibility of the Senedd, which is the Welsh Parliament, but in fact, as has been demonstrated with this post-Brexit regional aid programme, the UK government has decided that it wants to bypass the Welsh government and basically run the show themselves. That is seen by many people in Wales, in political circles, as contrary to the letter and spirit of the devolution settlement. So there is this concern that powers are being grabbed by the UK government, who are not treating the Welsh government, or indeed in a wider sense Wales, with the respect that it deserves.
احترام مستحق غير متوفر، هكذا هو واقع ويلز الجديد على الرغم من كثرة الوعود والضمانات.
Well, when it was decided to come out of the EU with the referendum in 2016, and indeed in the campaign leading up to that, promises were made by Conservative Party politicians to the effect that Wales would not lose out by a single penny as a result of leaving the EU. Now, in reality, that has become a very controversial question, because the Welsh Labour government in Wales will produce figures which show that over a period of 3 years, Wales is actually getting a total of £1 billion less than it would have done if it had remained in the European Union. Now, there are various schemes that are going ahead, some of which are in parallel with the kinds of regional aid programmes that were in existence when we were part of the EU. For example, there are what are known as city deals, and in a sense, Wales is benefiting from a couple of these city deals where the UK government has put so much money in.
So the UK government has designed a programme called Shared Prosperity and Levelling Up, and through those programmes there will be funding that will come into Wales. It will go to all areas where there is a need to what's called level up, where there is a recognised issue around economic development. It's going to be distributed in a different way to the funding that we've had previously. So this funding will come through the local authorities here across Wales and across the nation, the wider nation. And those local authorities are quite small, so the funding is in essence cut up into smaller chunks. And for us, the research tends to go outside of boundaries. It doesn't go into these local areas. If we want to research on climate change, if we want to research on data, we'd love to do that across Wales, we'd love to do that across the UK. So there are some challenges around this new funding mechanism, both in the amount of money that will be available, but also in the distribution of it.
For example, in the Cardiff area, there's something called the Cardiff Capital Region City Deal, which entails a total of about £1.3 billion over quite a long period in order to get various projects going, economic development. The biggest project actually is the development of the South Wales Metro. Now that is essentially providing an upgrade to the existing rail network in South East Wales, and that means that there is a need to upgrade the infrastructure. So that's something that's going forward. It's taking an immensely long time for this to come to fruition. I mean, it's been spoken about for many years, and even now we still haven't seen this. There is money being put into it, there's work going on, but one of the problems in Wales is that we have what I and others have described as slow motion politics.
يمكن وصف الحديث عن استقلال ويلز بالهامشي، لكن مع ملف بريكزيت توسعت دائرة الحديث عن الاستقلال.
what we saw during the Brexit process was that intergovernmental machinery that should be there so that Welsh interests can be heard and woven into decision making, that was not functioning. And we saw really an increased centralisation, this muscular unionism from Westminster government, which left groups of people in Wales more interested in the potential of an independent Wales. We are very much in the early days of this movement within Wales. However, it's not insignificant numbers of people are now what we call indie curious.
I think it's the case that people in Wales are at a bit of a crossroads because they feel that they are let down by the UK government, and yet they're not confident in many ways, or many of them are not confident enough to say, right, we support independence. So people don't really know what to think. There's also a problem in Wales about the fact that a lot of people do not perhaps take sufficient interest in politics, and it's very easy for people to get into a frame of mind where they just consider themselves to be victims.
من المؤكد أن وضع أفقر بلدان المملكة ليس بالسهل، إذ يمكن وصف إسهامه بالرحيل عن الاتحاد الأوروبي بغلطة الشاطر، إلا أنه في زمن الاتحاد لم يكن شاطراً، بل كان مدللاً ومرفهاً، وسرعان ما اكتشف خسارته. لكن الندم وبالرغم من كثرته لا يفيد، فاليوم وتحت هيمنة لندن عليه أن يكون أكثر حذراً وأكثر دقة في تحديد أولوياته ومصيره. فهل سيستطيع؟